Welcome to the Hill Update. I'm your host, Dean Allison. In today's opening, I'd like to take you back to 2019 and the federal election that happened that year. Election day was October 21st. You'll probably know that on that day, the current federal government was reduced to a minority government, losing 26 seats. A huge blow delivered for the most part by the provinces of Saskatchewan and Alberta. What you probably don't know is that within the last 10 days of the campaign, Canada's state broadcaster, the CBC, sued the Conservative Party. Again, this happened during the campaign, prompting many commentators to once again accuse the CBC of an anti-conservative bias. So why did the CBC sue the Conservative Party? They sued because the Conservatives had put a campaign ad that had some of the CBC footage. The broadcaster accused the Conservative Party of copyright infringement for using this particular footage. The CBC also claimed that it suffered reputational damage. The claim was that by using a total of 30 seconds of video material from the CBC in a 1 minute and 45-second online ad, and by using video clips for tweets put up during the leaders' debate, the Conservatives had taken CBC's work without their permission. At issue was the video titled "Look at What We've Done," published around October 4th on a Conservative Party website called notasadvertised.ca. It was a Facebook page and a YouTube page. The Conservatives responded that they were working under the fair dealings provision of Canada's Copyright Act and that their actions were protected. The ads in question also contained material from CTV, City TV, and Global, but only CBC launched a lawsuit against the Conservatives. The CBC launched the case even though they had been warned in the past against doing so. Elections Canada had even stated that the use of the broadcast news material in an ad is not a violation of copyright. More than a year and a half after the election, a federal judge has ruled on the case. The CBC lost. The court found no evidence that the broadcaster suffered reputational damage. In his decision, Judge Michael Phelan said that the CBC did not prove that the Conservative Party harmed the broadcaster by using their footage during the 2019 federal election. Phelan also wrote, "There was no evidence presented that a broadcaster's segment disclosed in a partisan setting reflected adversely on the broadcaster." The court also ordered the CBC to pay the Conservative Party's legal costs. Many commentators have accused the CBC's conduct as appalling and politically motivated. Rex Murphy, in his usual wit, had this to say: "You do not send out your morning reporters in the morning to cover a politician, and then send out your lawyers in the afternoon to harass them in court. It goes against, what is that term? The doctrine of impartiality in news coverage." Others say that the lawsuit was further proof of just how anti-conservative the CBC has become. Brian Lilley from the Toronto Sun gave his take on the CBC's action, saying, "Nothing like being a player in the game where you're supposed to be a neutral observer." Lilley also goes on to say, "What undermines trust in the CBC is that it poses as a neutral media observer when it has fully transformed into an arm of the Liberal Party." Lilley concludes that the CBC would earn more respect from the millions of Canadians who currently refuse to watch them if they would just admit their political bias. Keep in mind that the CBC receives $1.2 billion annually from the federal government, and yet fewer and fewer Canadians are actually tuning in. The declining viewership has gone on for years, yet the broadcaster's government funding has continued to increase. It makes little sense. In response to the court ruling, the Conservative Party issued a statement saying, "This decision is a clear win for democracy. It will serve to enhance the freedom of political expression, a significant component of a healthy democracy." Joining me on the show this week is Rachael Harder. Rachael is the MP for the riding of Lethbridge in southern Alberta. She was first elected in 2015. In 2016, she was named as one of Lethbridge's top 40 under 40. After the 2019 re-election, Rachael was elected as chair of the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. She is currently the Shadow Minister for Digital Government. Joining me after the break will be Rachael Harder. And we're going to take time to look at Bill C-10. There's been a lot of controversy around it and a lot of concerns about restrictions on our freedom of speech. Join us after the break. Joining me on the show this week is Rachael Harder, MP for Lethbridge. Rachael, thanks for joining me on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Dean. Great to be here.
So you're responsible for your Shadow Minister for digital economy. Talk to us a bit about Bill C-10. We've heard a lot about it in the news. Lots of commentary. Lots of people commenting. Michael Geist. There's a whole bunch of commentary. What was the purpose of C-10? What was it supposed to do? What was the intent? Why did the Liberal government introduce Bill C-10?
Sure, I appreciate the question and the opportunity to clarify. The current government, the Liberals, they would like to pass this off as what they're calling a modernization to the Broadcasting Act. Now, interestingly enough, many professionals, including those who helped draft the original Broadcasting Act, would actually say it doesn't need to be modernized. In fact, it should probably be scrapped because it's kind of old, outdated, and unnecessary going forward. The internet is an entirely different platform, and it shouldn't be regulated by the Broadcasting Act, is what many experts would argue. And so, really, in actuality, what this bill truly does is it actually censors what people can and cannot post online, and its prioritization. So it's essentially a way for the government to choose winners and losers. Some content will get pushed to the front page, some content will get pushed to the back page. Some creators or those who post online will be promoted as winners, and some will be demoted as losers. And it'll all be governed by the Liberal Party of Canada and the algorithms that they dictate to the CRTC.
So part of what I hear is pushback from the Liberal Party was that we really needed something to deal with the big players, right? So the Facebooks of the world, the Googles, et cetera, et cetera. What argument are they trying to make there, and why does that not hold?
Right. So they're trying to pass this off as something that would create what they're calling a level playing field. So it would mean that, Netflix, YouTube, Spotify, Disney Plus, these types of large streaming companies would have to pay 30% of their revenue into a fund that would then go towards Canadian artists who are promoting, quote, Canadian content. Now, sure, there are these companies out there that are not paying into the Canadian tax system, and that is a problem that probably should be addressed. But this, working through the Broadcasting Act in order to do that is totally inappropriate. And one of the repercussions of that, like I said, is in this legislation, there is major censorship taking place. There is no other democratic country in the world that is choosing to use their Broadcasting Act to censor the internet. And so it's crazy. Like, Dean, we're basically joining the likes of China, Turkey, North Korea in terms of the level of censorship that this would apply to those using online services.
So one of the things that, I know that we're in the process of ratifying the free trade deal with the U.S. This has actually been a bone of contention in terms of charging. I mean, you mentioned the fact that there's not a lot of revenue the government gets from these international players like Netflix, et cetera, et cetera. That's a concern the U.S. has in a big way. So just talk to us about your thoughts on, you talk about a fund that is Canadian content, which is different from them taxing or similar. So explain sort of what they're thinking along those lines.
Sure. So again, they're trying to pass it off as if it's leveling the playing field. But at the end of the day, really what this is about is a small coalition of artists that are still functioning in the 1980s. And they're just not able to make a go of it on their own because they're not willing to update their practices. And so because they rely on government funding, government grants in order to produce artistic content, they're wanting these large streaming companies to have to pay essentially off of their revenues and put it into this fund. These artists then would benefit from that because they would be supported in the content that they're generating. Now, the truth is, Dean, in the last decade, the best artists that have come out of Canada, the Justin Biebers of the world, the Drakes, they have come out of our country strong and powerful and able to take their place on center stage, not because they got government grants, not because they signed up for some funding option, but because they promoted themselves on the platform YouTube. And from there, they were identified as individuals having talent. And then from there, they were able to continue to grow their audience and, of course, went worldwide. This is the new way. And unfortunately, what's happening again is you have this small coalition of artists that are wanting the government to move in this direction to, impose fees on these streaming companies and again to censor the content that's available online. This has everything to do with benefiting them and nothing to do with benefiting the general population of Canada.
Well, hold that thought. We come back from break. We're going to discuss more of that. Joining us on the show today is Rachael Harder, MP for Lethbridge and also the Shadow Minister for Digital Economy. You mentioned before the break, Rachael, the fact that we talk about content being pushed up or pushed down. Let's talk a little bit more specifically about some of the concerns that you and the Conservative Party have about the bill, and of course other critics. And as you said in the first segment, there's been no shortage of critics against this bill. So could you get into some more details about what some of the issues are?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's important to point out, individuals who have been commissioners for the CRTC in the past, individuals who specialize in e-commerce and law, individuals who were a part of drafting the original broadcasting legislation that governs our country. All of these individuals have spoken out against this legislation, and they've actually gone so far as to say Bill C-10 should be scrapped altogether, and we should start from the very beginning. Some of the biggest concerns that are coming out of it are around the issue of free speech. And so, of course, under the Charter, Section 2B, we're granted the right to be able to express our opinions, our beliefs, our thoughts with freedom. And we know that the new public square is online. It's found within social media platforms. That's where we exchange ideas. That's where we share videos. That's where we look to promote ideas. Now this legislation is actually threatening that, because what it will do is it'll, allow the government through the CRTC, a regulating arm, to determine, which videos or what content will be given priority and therefore bumped up to the top of your page, and which material will get bumped down. And so really it's a form of the government choosing winners and losers. It's a form of the government censoring what you can and cannot have access to and what you can and cannot promote online. It's extremely dictatorial. It's extremely problematic.
Well, what I find interesting too is that sometimes when you have a party that's concerned about legislation, you don't always have the chorus of supporters like you do around this one. And you did mention we've got former executives from the CRTC. You've got prominent lawyers in this space, professors that are all speaking out. That should really tell us something in terms about the concern, and that this is not really a political issue, but this is really a broader issue around freedom of speech.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And, I think, it's a lot of their argument, a lot of the government's argument, or what they'll say as well, YouTube and TikTok and let's say Facebook, they're already using algorithms in order to determine, what content you see. That's true to some extent. Those algorithms are based on the things that you like already. So if you like watching videos having to do with dogs, you're going to get more videos suggested to you having to do with dogs. YouTube isn't all of a sudden going to start throwing videos at you having to do with basket weaving. But what we're talking about here now is not just a platform determining algorithms that are going to best serve the consumer or the user of the platform, but rather algorithms that the government is going to create and then curate the material that you do and do not have access to. And so it is, in fact, a form of speech censorship. And it's wrong. It's wrong for the government to step in and to play that role in our lives.
So, one of the questions I'll ask is, the average person out there says, well, I don't really worry about that because I'm not that political, right? We're worried about political people being shut down potentially. But the reality is, as you've just said, the average person could be censored as well. It's not without the realm of possibility.
Totally. And, I guess I would just say, yes, first off, every single Canadian will be impacted by this. And second, I would just say, think about the people that we're most proud of who have, risen to the top and become voices for us as a nation, whether that's within the music industry or other artistic expressions. One example that I'll draw your attention to would be Justin Bieber. Justin Bieber in 2013 was just a kid posting videos on YouTube. He, through organic reach, was able to promote himself and garner an audience. And that audience continued to grow to the point where he became an international sensation. He did that because he understood how to use the online platform and make it work to his benefit. If the government was to put their hands in there, which is what they'll do with C10, they would be playing around in such a way that they would either promote or demote someone like Justin Bieber, and therefore it would be the government dictating an artist's success rather than an artist being able to look after their own promotion. It's wrong, and it's actually going to hurt the industry. It's not going to benefit artists. It's going to hurt them.
When we come back from break, Rachel, let's talk about what the other parties are thinking. Joining me on the show today is MP Rachael Harder from Lethbridge and the Shadow Minister for Digital Economy. Rachel, just before the break, we were talking about what this could do to individuals. So we've got a number of people that are former executives. We've got lawyers, people that, professors that are concerned about this. Let's talk about the House now. Let's talk about the politics of the actual bill. Where are all the parties on this particular bill? I mean, originally, I did not believe the NDP and the Bloc were going to support it, but now I believe they've changed their mind. We're at first reading, into second reading. So where is the bill right now? And where are the parties lined up in terms of their concerns for support or against the bill?
Sure. So maybe to answer that question in the best way possible, it's worth just taking one moment and describing a bit of the history of this bill. So it was first introduced in the House in the fall 2020. And at that point in time, it was a rather innocent bill, kind of silly and somewhat frivolous, but nevertheless, it wasn't super harmful. What happened was it came to committee for what's called clause by clause examination, which is where the members of the committee actually go through it line by line and determine what's going to stay and what's going to go. And what happened about 4 weeks ago was it was determined that one section of the bill, 4.1, was going to be removed. Now, that section of this bill actually protected the content that you or I or other Canadians would post online. With that clause removed, it therefore takes away any protection that we once enjoyed, which again means that the government is in fact going to censor the information that you and other individual Canadians post online. That's a problem. So where does that bring us in terms of different parties? Obviously, the Conservative Party of Canada is very much opposed to this. We view it as a significant attack on free speech. And then we would look at the NDP and the Bloc, the other key players at the committee, and they've suggested that there might be some tweaking necessary. Maybe they would suggest a couple of amendments, but overall they're okay with this bill. The reason they're okay with this bill, in terms of the Bloc, is because Quebec has everything to gain from this bill. That is where, the majority of money will go from the government to Canadian artists in order to support them in their efforts going forward. It's also going to result in algorithms, most likely, that are going to support Quebec artistry or Quebec content, Quebec culture. And so, of course, the province of Quebec has much to gain from this legislation. So the Bloc find themselves very much in favor of it. The NDP are very much in favor of any sort of policy that would create, quote, an equal playing field. So rather than an artist being able to promote themselves and rise to the top, the NDP aren't really big fans of that. They would prefer actually that everybody, those who are high up would be brought down low, and those that are low would be brought to the middle. And so then we have an even playing field. All artists have an equal chance at success, which, Dean, I just think that's garbage. Like, those artists who are great, they're going to promote themselves. They're going to be, appreciated for the content that they're producing. And of course, they're going to rise to the top. And they should. They should. Shame on the government for punishing them through algorithms. And, and then in addition to that, of course, the NDP are in support of streaming companies having to take 30% of their revenue and pay it into the fund for these struggling artists. Well, look, these large streaming companies, yes, they should be paying a tax. They're benefiting from the Canadian public. They're existing here within our country, and so they should be paying tax. But to take 30% of their revenue and put it into a special fund that is going to go towards artists that, quite frankly, are just outdated and, disgruntled because they're not able to make a go of it, that's wrong. It's just wrong.
Well, listen, Rachel, thank you very much for being here today. I'm assuming that the Conservative Party would repeal this should we get in government, and I think that's reassuring. But we really appreciate you laying the framework for us today on what's really going on with C10, and we'll be watching it as we move forward over the coming weeks and months. Thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks, Dean.
Thank you for joining us on the show this week. One of the things that we need to be concerned about is freedom of speech in this country. And there are always bills and there's always intended and unintended consequences. And by the sounds of it, Bill C10 has got lots of unintended consequences. So we should pay attention, we should see what's going on and realize that our freedom and our freedom of speech is very important. Thank you for joining me on the Hill Update this week. I want to wish you a great week. Thanks for coming.